seconds.
Good evening and welcome to the October 29th, 2019 meeting of the Guilderland School Board. For those in attendance, and we do have quite a few people, thanks for joining us tonight. We'd ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time, and also we will now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For the first item on tonight's agenda, we have an opportunity for public input on the 2020-2021 budget development process. The board receives input through letters and emails throughout the school year, and then there's always a public comment at every meeting where you can join us and give input. Tonight we have time set aside for feedback and ideas about anything going on in the district for budget development. So if there's anyone who would like to step up to the mic. We have one. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Heather Murphy. I have a fourth grader and a first grader at Westmere Elementary. What I want to talk about is the math curriculum and the general concerns I have and how that is kind of factored in as you're budgeting for next year. My son in third grade used the iReady math program, but now in fourth grade is using Investigations 3 by Pearson. And I realize math is taught differently now than when I was a child, but I do feel that my son in fourth grade is doing pretty much the exact same type of work that his sister in first grade is doing. He's coming home with, very small assignments to do, drawing pictures, showing arrays, and I feel like he's just not being pushed and making progress, especially when we're also told that fluency is a huge factor. They should be fluent in their facts. How are they demonstrating that fluency, in the homework, in the activities that they're doing? One thing I see is also that almost everything he's coming home with in the math curriculum is word problems. And so there might be 2 word problems, 3 word problems he's coming home with. And I really wonder, if he's moving forward in his math, whether he's going to be prepared later on for the rigor that math and computing will have when he's in middle school and in high school and as he advances. And all the work and time that will take, whether the fact that in fourth grade, again, he's doing a lot of the same kind of basic concepts that his younger sister is doing. I just feel like I'm not seeing that progress. So in terms of the budget, I'm wondering how these products are chosen by the district and how they're assigned to either the classrooms themselves or to the particular schools. Does each elementary school use different math programs? Is the math program decided to buy over a couple years? Because I feel like also he has gone through several different math programs while he's been at Westmere, so that they're slightly different, and whether the teachers are really building upon one thing or the other, or by switching to a new product and a new math program, is there not really progress in certain areas? I want to know, how much, how they're chosen, whose input is being used in that process, how the district is assessing the efficacy of the programs themselves, wondering again, how long they're going to use that particular product for. And again, as he's transitioned from fourth grade, fifth grade, and he's going into the middle school, is the middle school using that same product? Is it going to be seen throughout the whole period? Thank you.
Thank you. Is that something that we can respond to a little bit, since this wasn't official public comment, since it was part of budget?
If you're comfortable, I'd be happy to.
I'm fine with it.
Okay, sure. Hi. So I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, so I oversee many of the curricular decisions that we make. The new math program was selected over the course of about a year and a half. So we have a math cabinet, a curriculum cabinet that's comprised of our math specialists. We have middle school teachers, middle school administrators, high school teachers, high school administrators as well. So we went through a process which started in the spring, what are we in, spring of 17, I would say, in reviewing and selecting possible math products or programs to use. We had teams of teachers who went and did site visits in different locations that had been using some of the options that we looked at. We did a whole research study on the efficacy of programs as well. And then over the course of last year, we had about 22, if I remember correctly, elementary teachers piloting programs. The teachers came together, we did surveys, got their feedback throughout the course of the year. They came together several times over the course of the year for some focus groups and further conversation about that. And it was quite a unanimous decision, I would say. I'm not trying to in any way minimize your concerns to go with this program. And so far, it's been really very positively received. Your concerns, however, I think are largely due to some of the transitions that are inevitably going to happen. So when we have, when you come off of one program that has a certain scope and sequence of instruction, and you go to something else, inevitably in that year of transition, possibly 2 years of transition, you're going to have either some things that are repeated or some things that they didn't learn previously. So we're working through that. I don't think that's an uncommon phenomenon. I think it's something that we fully anticipated and expected as well. We will be evaluating the program for sure over the course of the year and making some adjustments. One of the things that we learned from one of the site visits in particular that we went to, which was Skaneateles out by Syracuse, was they had a similar thing happen in the first year of implementation. And they made some immediate shifts for the second year where they changed the scope and the sequence of the program, holding true to the philosophy of the program, but at the same time recognizing that there are some things that are unique to New York. State testing, and when that happens is a good example. Do we make sure that our students are getting exposed to the rigor and the content that they have to have understanding and mastery of going into state tests? So it was a long, lengthy process. Again, it's a first year of implementation. I think inevitably when we get back together toward the latter part of the year and into the summer, we'll be sitting down and making some revisions and adjustments as we see our students and how they respond to it.
I don't know if this is the back, but I was just curious, how long is the budget for them to apply to this product? Is it a one-time price that you're paying, or is it?
No, we bought in for 5 years. We did buy in for, which is what we did with the previous product as well, which was Go Math.
Which my son started with.
Yeah, so really that's, I don't know what other programs you're referring to. I mean, Go Math is basically what we had for,
Last year you used iReady.
well, iReady is really an assessment tool. It's not really a curriculum or program. So it's a tool that we use for screening and further assessment of our elementary students. We also use it at the middle school as well. So it's separate from the math program itself, which is somewhat intentional. Because we do want to be able to assess students both on a screening perspective, but also on an ongoing perspective about their response to learning standards, which of course is what we're held to in the state. So we do look for somewhat of an objective assessment to kind of parallel what we do with the math program and the instruction there as well. Okay, hope that helped.
And I'm just going to chime in a little bit. I taught in the district for 30 years, all elementary, 7 years at Westmere, and probably went through, 4 math programs, thereabouts. And it does take you a couple years as a teacher, to at least 2 years, to really get into a new math program and kind of make it your own. Math is math, it's add, subtract, multiply, and divide, but the way it's presented and the critical thinking that you're expecting of the students changes dramatically from program to program. So the teachers definitely need a good solid year. I'm hearing very good things about investigations, but that it's time consuming in this first year. So things will kind of iron out as time goes along.
So then what kind of development are you giving for time using the teachers to provide them support in order to implement the program?
So it started last spring, actually. So once we selected the program, we had some trainers come in and started the training back in May, like late May, I think it was. So they had a day of kind of introduction, orientation to that. We had some work that we did with our new teachers in particular over the course of the summer. And then we have really a series of things that are taking place over the course of this year. Some are facilitated by the math specialists within the building. We also have the trainers coming in. Again, it's not Pearson trainers, but they're Turk trainers. Turk is the research arm that basically developed the program. They are coming in December 2nd through, whatever that week is, 2nd through 5th, I guess it is. And they're going to be actually doing model lessons, so teachers will be able to observe model lessons, work with the trainers, ask questions, et cetera. And then, again, throughout the course of the winter and the spring months, we have dates set aside in each building when they're going to be working with the math specialists and collaborating with their grade level colleagues as well.
In general, during the school year, are those times when the teachers are put out their instructional time and the substitute?
Sometimes, yes. I mean, that unfortunately is almost inevitable, especially when you have a new program that's being implemented. To be able to carve out that time, it typically does fall on a school day. So we do have substitutes arranged for them. We try to be consistent in who the subs are, so the teacher has a working relationship with the substitute to the degree that we possibly can, but I will tell you, substitutes are a challenge. It has been for a number of years for us. So.
Thank you. That was a good way to start things off tonight. Thank you. Anyone else for budget input? And we can roll that also into public comment. I know you were signed up for public comment, but we got you all set. Anyone else? All right then. Next up, we have a presentation. This should be very exciting from students and staff members about the Unified Sports Program. And I don't know if Superintendent wants to say anything also.
We're really so happy to have students and faculty here from our Unified Sports Program. We've recently been recognized nationally for our work. So, Regan, are you the Master of Ceremonies for this? Then please come to the podium.
So, good evening, everyone. This evening we have members of our unified programs. We have our unified basketball and bowling and unified PE programs, both staff, students, partners, and athletes who are joining us. I don't know, I'm sure Dr. Wiles showed you the pictures of the banner that's hanging in front of the high school as you walk in. Unfortunately, we weren't able to bring it tonight because it's already up and looking great. But we wanted to make sure that we told them how proud we are of them, and super excited also to have Mr. Nate Johnson, who's here. Come on up, Nate. Nate is he works with Special Olympics New York. Tell me your title again, Nate. You got a
Senior Director of Unified Sports.
Okay, Senior Director of Unified Sports. He's also a Guilderland resident, so he wanted to show his support this evening and show up. Maybe if you want to say a couple things about the program, not to put you on the spot or anything, but.
Thank you much. So I had a chance to attend the banner ceremony, which we did at the all-school pep assembly, spirit assembly, and it was amazing. It was amazing as a parent, also of a Westmere first grader, to feel like I live in a district that values these things, like inclusion. And it's been great to see the work that this whole team has put together. Coach Tynan, Coach Gallagher, Coach Relia, and so many other people. Meeting Regan 7 years ago when we first started piloting the Unified Champion Schools program in Section 2, Guilderland was one of 12 schools that stepped up and said, we're willing to take this risk with Special Olympics, and it's been great to see that the impact that it's having, and awesome to live in a district that really embraces it this fully. So thank you.
Perfect. So along those same lines, we're actually starting to talk about expanding our unified program, and we just had a conversation last month about a fall offering that we're talking about cross-country maybe for next year, and we're also having conversations about starting it at the middle school level, so expanding it from the bottom up, and we're super excited, and the students and staff that you see in front of you have really been the groundbreakers and the people that have been behind the movement, and super proud to be here with everybody and all the work that they've done. I can't say enough. So, and thank you very much for your support of the Unified program. Anybody else want to?
Regan?
Yes.
Just, it's a wonderful opportunity for the students and for anybody who can go. I went to a basketball game here at Guilderland last year, and it was one of the most heartwarming, wonderful things that I've done. Certainly as a board member, it's very satisfying. So Regan is going to give us a schedule, or at least let us know,
Yep.
so that we can be part of it, because it's wonderful.
Yep.
It is terrific, and these kids are just great, all of them.
The first bowling matches will be the first week in February. They're going to start practice towards the end of January, and so we'll have probably about 3, maybe 4 home bowling matches.
And
there's
where is your,
at Town and Country.
okay.
Yep, here in town, and they'll go on the road for a couple matches, and then we have a culminating event that I think is beginning of March. Yep, and so once that ends, then we get rolling with unified basketball, which will start right around the end of March, beginning of April. So-
Okay, it's that, I didn't realize it was that late. I thought it was the same.
Yeah.
time. Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
I can't wait.
I'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of the schedule, so if you can make it, that'd be great.
Could you introduce us to the athletes that are here tonight?
I would love to
That'd be
help.
great. Yeah. Well, actually, if they'd introduce themselves, I'd love to hear from. What sport do you play? That's
I do both bowling and basketball.
great. Thank you.
Elena, I'm in Unified PE.
I'm Grace, I'm in Unified PE and Unified Bowling.
I'm Sierra, I'm in Unified PE, basketball, and bowling.
My name is Ben. I'm in bowling, basketball. We would like PE.
I'm Sammy, and I'm in Unified Unified Bowling, and Unified PE.
I'm Matt Dunnigan, and I am in Unified Bowling and Unified Basketball.
Nice job.
Thank you.
I guess the staff didn't want to introduce themselves, but in the back is Gary Bowl, who's one of our unified phys ed teachers, and then we have Allison Relier, Kelly Gallagher, and Kelly Tynan, who coach basketball and basketball for us.
Great. Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate you being here, appreciate all your hard work and your efforts, and I'll look forward to seeing you in bowling in February for sure. That sounds like a lot of fun. And Regan, can some of those dates and information get up on the website probably too? Or? Perfect.
Once the schedules go live, they'll be on Schedule Galaxy, which is there's a link on our website that can bring you right to them. It actually give you, when you click on an away, if you want to make an away match or a game, you click on the map and it'll tell you exactly how to get there. So,
Great.
yep.
Thank you. And if anyone feels like they need to leave, you certainly may. You don't have to stay through everything. We'd love it if you do, but we understand that you might have like Halloween things to get ready for. So, but we thank you for being here. Next up, we have another program piece for tonight, and that is a presentation about ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and that will be a report from the superintendent and the assistant superintendent for curriculum development.
Well, good evening, everyone. What a difficult act to follow, especially to talk about federal legislation. But ironically, in talking about this particular federal legislation, it's actually a very good match to what we just talked about, because ESSA is really about every student and the work we need to do to make sure that every student does have the opportunity to succeed, which is what we spend a ton of time working on here. So what is ESSA? It is a federal law, and it has requirements for a number of things, but the topics that get talked about most have to do with school accountability, school improvement, educator development or professional development, and the supports that we provide for students. But ESSA has a long history. I mean, here we tell you that it was passed into law in 2015, and it replaced No Child Left Behind, which was passed in 2001. But ESSA is really the 1965 federal legislation for elementary and secondary education. And the whole purpose of that early legislation was to provide for the most vulnerable students. So even though we talk about this as new legislation, it really is the reauthorization of longstanding federal rules and regulations whose goal it is to make sure that we are serving all students well, especially those students who are most vulnerable. So the ESSA came into place in 2015. Every state in the country had to come up with its own rules and procedures for its implementation. As you can see, it took New York quite a bit of time to do that. But they did it in a very inclusive way. They pulled together teams of stakeholders from across the state. We participated. We had students who participated in order to make a plan that would work for New York. And that's what we're going to share with you tonight. So the implementation of all of this and the accountability actually began last school year, so we are truly living this as we speak, and it will have implications not only how we do things, but how we budget and how we report, and there's just quite a bit to it. Ultimately, though, the Every Student Succeeds Act is all about equity, and it's a mechanism where we use external measures to figure out how well our internal work helps all students and make sure that we don't shortchange any of our students. This resonates right now. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about our own mission statement, the one I've shortened to 4 words, all students, future ready, and how well are we doing the all, each and every who make up that all. And that's really what ESSA is at its essence. So that's by way of introduction. I'm going to give all the hard parts to Damien because he's going to talk about the many twists and turns of the rules and regulations that we have to follow, and then I'll be back to wrap it up in the end. So Damien, all you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So Tim, when you introduced the first presentation as sure to be exciting, I was convinced that you were talking about this presentation, but I guess not. So let me just first I guess, give you a fair warning here. ESSA is extremely complex. I could literally sit here and give you a full day of a workshop around ESSA. It's very, very complicated. So we're hoping we're not going to overwhelm you with some of the complexities of it, but to give you at least a snapshot into where we are from an accountability perspective, what our data is showing, how we prioritize some of the data and start to identify some plans of action based on the information that we receive. So there is a theory of action behind ESSA, and I'll try to sum it up into a few if statements and how that will ultimately, per the theory of action, result in a then statement. So the ifs. One is that New York identifies the characteristics of highly effective schools that provide culturally responsive teaching and learning, if number 1. 2, schools and districts and the state collaborate to determine the degree to which each school demonstrates the characteristics of a highly effective school. 3, schools, districts, and the state collaborate to develop plans to address gaps between the current conditions in each school and the characteristics of highly effective schools. 4, schools and districts are provided with resources, including human capital, to implement these plans. 5, these resources are used to effectively implement plans that are assessed regularly and revised as appropriate. And then the last if statement would be additional supports and interventions occur when schools and districts that are low performing do not improve. The big then is that New York State will eliminate gaps in achievement. The word gap is critical, and I'll hone in on that on a few opportunities throughout the presentation. So going back to the former amendment to legislation, which was called No Child Left Behind, the accountability system was largely, almost entirely based on achievement in ELA, English Language Arts, and mathematics, coupled with participation rates. So there was an overarching rule under No Child Left Behind that 95% of our eligible students would participate in state testing. At the high school level, it was focused in on 4-year and 5-year graduation rates, and then the school classifications were based on the overall ELA math performance and/or those graduation rates. To achieve the equity under those theories of action for ESSA, that had to be revised. It had to be expanded to include some additional accountability measures. So measures in academic core subjects, 4-year, 5-year, and now 6-year graduation rates are included. academic progress goals at the state level as well as the district level, which is different than No Child Left Behind. It had formerly been at the state level. School classifications are based on a very comprehensive approach now, which includes some non-academic indicators, chronic absenteeism, for example, suspension rates, and then college, career, and civic readiness, which is what the CCCR stands for. And it's based on a gap-closing approach. It's not entirely just based on achievement, but it is largely based on a gap-closing approach. So the multiple measures, there are 7 key measures that we will be talking about tonight. One is student academic achievement. Second is student growth, academic progress, graduation rates, which is high school only, English language proficiency, which is focused on our ENL population, chronic absenteeism, and then again that CCCR measure. So for each of these, a performance level will be determined that will be a 1, 2, 3, or a 4. To give you some deeper definitions of these, the student academic achievement is for all of our schools, and it is based on the Composite Performance Index, which measures the achievement on state assessments in ELA, math, and science, and for high schools, add social studies to that as well. Social studies had formerly not been factored into accountability measures. Student growth is for elementary and middle schools, and it measures student growth on statewide assessments, again in ELA and math, for students in grades 4 through 8, by comparing the scores of students in the current year to the scores of students with similar scores in prior years. Complicated. Academic progress. This is for all of our schools, all levels, and it measures student progress on state assessments in ELA and math against long-term goals, which are defined at both the district level as well as the state level, and then what is known as a measure of interim progress, and that is a key point that I'll focus on in a few moments. Graduation rates, again, the major shift there is that it adds a 6-year cohort graduation to the accountability measures. The English language proficiency is for all of our schools, and this measures the progress of our English language learners in meeting their individual progress targets on the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test, or NYSASLAT. Chronic absenteeism applies to all schools, and this measures the percentage of students who miss 10% or more of the school year against long-term goals and those measures of interim progress. And then college, career, and civic readiness is applied to the high school, measures the percentage of students who are leaving school prepared for college, career, and civic readiness as measured by a few different things. One being diploma type, credentials that are earned, advanced course credits and enrollment in advanced courses, career and technical education certificates, which I think is a very welcome piece, and other similar indicators against those long-term goals in the MIP. So these are the major categories that are being used to hold schools and districts accountable. When those are all tabulated, there are now new school classifications, which range from the highest level, which is known as a recognition school, and that basically means the school received many 4s, down to what is known as a comprehensive support and improvement school. Many 1s would be an example for that particular category. Right now, our district has all schools, with one exception, in good standing, and the one exception is that we just received notification that our high school is a recognition school for 1920. So congratulations, Mr. Piscarelli. The high school, because that comes from the commissioner's office when they identify a recognition school, that's the only piece that we have for 1920. We don't have the same set of data or categorizations for the other schools just yet. Should be coming soon. So how does New York State identify the schools for recognition and support? Again, the commissioner is the one who looks at the recognition schools and says a school that is high performing or rapidly improving would then be a recognition school. Schools in good standing are simply schools that are not TSI, CSI, or recognition. Targeted school improvement schools are schools with low performing subgroups. So for example, you might have a low performing economically disadvantaged subgroup, English language learner subgroup, etc. And then a comprehensive support and improvement school, not where we want to be, certainly, is a school with low overall performances for all students group and graduation rates that fall below 67%, or a school with low performing subgroups that have not improved. So this word subgroup is important, and there is a really seems like a small change, but it's really a huge change when compared to No Child Left Behind. So in order for a school under No Child Left Behind to have a subgroup for accountability purposes, the old language was that there had to be 30 or more students who fell in that subgroup. So for example, if Guilderland Elementary School had 30 or more E&L students, which happens every year, I can tell you that, they have a formal accountability subgroup around E&L. The change now is one word, and it's the word results. So under ESSA now, there must be 30 results for a subgroup for a school to receive an accountability rating on that indicator. So let's play this out for a second. Let's say we transition to Pine Bush Elementary School, which typically has a lower E&L population than the other schools. Let's say they had 15 English language learners in the school. Under old rules, not a subgroup. Under new rules, if those same 15 students took the 3rd grade ELA, 3rd grade math, 4th grade science, 4th grade ELA, 4th grade math, 5th grade ELA, and 5th grade science, you are now above 30 results. So the likelihood of our schools having more subgroups than they have ever had before is very real, and it's a pretty significant deal. So, you know, Pine Bush may not have had an E&L subgroup in past years. It's almost a guarantee that they will within the next year or two. So currently, the subgroups used for accountability measures are the All Students subgroup, American Indian or Alaskan Native subgroup, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Asian or Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders, white, multiracial, English language learner, students with disabilities, and economically disadvantaged. So those are all the groups that you could potentially have a formal accountability subgroup in. There are some new groups that have emerged as well, but these are not for the purpose of accountability. These are simply for the purpose of reporting back to the state education department. The new groups are homeless youth, non-homeless youth, military-connected youth, non-military connected youth, students in foster care, and students not in foster care. And those are really sets of data that the state is wanting to start to collect, but again, they're not used for accountability purposes for schools or districts. So the types of goals that are embedded in the ESSA data. Again, there are things known as end goals. And the end goal is basically where you need to be after a 5-year span of time. We have baseline performance, which was the 2017-18 school year. So all of the baseline came from the 2017-18 school year. That school year also begins a 5-year clock. So I mentioned the idea of gap closure being really the fundamental tenet of ESSA now, different from No Child Left Behind. The end goal is that if you have an identified gap for a formal accountability subgroup, what you have to do as a school or a district is close that gap by 20% in a 5-year time span. So you see where it says 20% gap, and that's based on taking the gap between the end goal and the current performance multiplied by 0.20. The long-term goals, so we have long-term goals that are established both at the state level as well as at the district level. The yearly gap reduction goal would basically be your 20% divided by 5, 4% per year if it's a true 20% gap. The first annual measure of interim progress was reported to us in 2018-19. So that basically says, all right, you had a gap in whatever subgroup it happens to be. In the 2018-19 or measure of interim progress, you should have closed that by a certain amount if you are to reach the end goal by the end of 5 years. Does that make sense? Okay, very different than No Child Left Behind. You are able to exceed your end goals, which gives you 4s, so that's a good thing if you are able to exceed those measures of interim progress and those end goals. The rule around 95% participation rates remains. However, it's been revised somewhat. So formerly under No Child Left Behind, if you did not have 95% of your eligible students participate in state testing, you did not reach what is known as adequate yearly progress. That was a long-standing rule in No Child Left Behind back from the inception of it. fast forward a few years ago, if you recall, we had quite an amount of pushback across the state around state testing and the Common Core learning standards, and there were a number of parents who refused to have their children participate in state testing. That applied to us, that applied to pretty much every district across the state. Some districts, as much as 70% of their parents still are refusing to have their children participate. We are below 20%. I think we are somewhere right now around 17%, if I remember correctly. So what that means is we are still not at 95%. Doesn't mean that we get hammered right off the bat, but what it does put into play now is a series of events that the district has to recognize and respond to. And that series of events basically says, okay, if you are not at 95%, first step is you have to complete a self-assessment. You have to look for ways that you can improve that participation rate over time. And you can see if you follow the flow chart here, if you go down to the bottom, if you have not exhibited any improvement there, ultimately BOCES and or the state education department will step in to basically say, here is your plan that you need to follow to get your participation rate up to 95%. We don't want to be there. We typically don't like it when state ed steps in and starts telling us what to do. It's never a good thing. So our first step is to do that self-assessment and really think, are there some strategies that we can put in play to improve that participation rate? So let's take a look at some data. And forgive me for the small font on the table here, but if you look across the table, you'll see, first column anyway, is on the top, it's the Guilderland Central School District, and then each of our schools is reflected below that. Second column over, you can see we're in good standing for 17-18, and then you can start to see how we stand with any recognized accountability subgroups. So all of our subgroups were in good standing as well. And then again, we did receive notice that Guilderland High School has been identified as a recognition school, still awaiting the results from other schools. That's the surface. And I would say the work, the analyses that are necessary to figure things out beyond just the status, the accountability status of good standing or CSI, TSI, really require some deep analysis and some careful looking at all of the subgroups that we have to pay close attention to. So we have found that we have several student subgroups that have emerged as priorities for each of our schools and the district as a whole in one or more measures of accountability. And again, that's kind of the deep dive into the data. So here's an example. This is our elementary and middle school subgroup performance measures. Elementary and middle school are bundled together now. It used to be elementary, middle, and high school. So now it's a K through 8 view for elementary and middle school. So if you see in the middle, I have highlighted in yellow and circled in red. This is our black subgroup. And you can see that on composite performance achievement level, we are at a 2. Student growth level, at a 2. Combined composite and student growth level, we are at a 2. So that tells us right off the bat, we need to pay attention to this subgroup. We need to do some things that are a bit different. We need to become more culturally responsive. We need to be engaging this subgroup better than what we have done previously. We're in good standing, but we have work that we need to do, and we recognize that. Now I'm going to bring you down to the bottom here, and I want to point out our white subgroup. There's a 2 in there for growth. But when you look at the overall achievement, we are at the highest level. So we achieved at a level 4, but the growth was not adequate when compared to similar scores for similar students from the previous year. So they're achieving at the highest level, but their growth wasn't enough to get us above a 2 for the 18-19 school year. So this is an anomaly that sometimes confuses people. They say, okay, you're achieving at the highest level, why do you have a 2 there? And it's because of that growth view that we have to pay attention to as well. In other words, we need to accelerate the growth a little bit more quickly than what we have in that particular year. So I'm going to bump you to the high school now. And I'm going to draw your attention to the right here where we have a 1. So this is for our economically disadvantaged subgroup in the accountability measure of average ELA and math academic progress. When we see a 1, that's a trigger for us to engage in certain steps and actions that we have to be responsive to. And I will tell you, economically disadvantaged is probably at the top, if not second, on our list of priorities based on overall data across the district. So let's take that now. So Mike Piscatelli, the principal, actually, if you go in the conference room tonight, you're going to see a giant spreadsheet in the back of the conference room. You may have already noticed it, but that is really the report for Guilderland High School from the 18-19 data. So Mike, as the leader of the school, engages a team in really a problem-solving exercise. It's called a Level 1 Needs Assessment. So when we have a school that is not identified as a CSI school or a TSI school, but receives a Level 1 on any indicator for any accountability subgroup, here's what has to happen. The school has to complete a self-assessment, and they have to inform the district of any additional assistance that the school needs to improve. The district, in turn, must identify the support that the district will provide in its consolidated application for federal funds. I'll elaborate on that in just a moment. The district must also direct local funds to targeted and school-based areas of need. So this is not entirely driving the use of federal funds, it's also directing how we allocate resources locally. That's Neil's world. But we have to now basically be allocating our resources to the schools and the places where we have the greatest amount of need. Makes sense, not that easy to execute. It's a lot of work to be able to do that. But these are really the 3 critical actions that have to take place. So I'm going to use Mr. Piscatelli as the example here. Sorry, Mike, you're my guinea pig, but he had a 1. We also had 1s in Guilderland Elementary School and Altamont Elementary School. So Farnsworth Middle School did not, Pine Bush Elementary School did not, Westmere Elementary School did not. All of them, however, had some 2s. So you may not be sitting at a 1 this year, but remember, it's measures of progress over a 5-year span of time. So if you don't look at those areas where you had a 2 and you don't respond to them, it's very likely you're going to be a 1 next year. So you might as well start thinking about the problem-solving task now. So anyway, for Mike's school as a Level 1 for the economically disadvantaged and that 1 accountability measure, he assembled a team, they reviewed the data, they looked at other forms of data, and tried to start identifying some potential solutions to be able to address the needs of that particular subgroup. And that's really the exercise that's at hand. The data basically draws your attention to an area of need. The school then engages in a collaborative process to try to come up with a potential solution to that problem area. So in doing so, we identified a series of priorities, which I think I'm handing back to Dr. Wiles to go through these.
Thanks, Damien. So given all of these accountability measures and the subgroups and the need to drive resources, we have some things we need to focus on. And number 1, right off the bat, we want to continue to focus on our professional development opportunities for our faculty and staff. And you can see some of the areas where we are really targeting our work. These are work around subgroups, so with our English language learners and our economically disadvantaged students and our students with color. We really are, as you've heard from numerous presentations we've done previously, even this year, really focusing in on our ability to be culturally responsive in our practices and our programs. So that is a huge priority for us. If you look at our professional development plan, if you look at our activities on superintendent's conference days, this is what we're doing. The other piece, and you know, we started stage 1 of the budget this week, and it's all about how are we distributing the resources. Yes, state and federal, we need to be careful about that, but we're also looking closely at our local dollars. How can we be certain that our dollars are being driven to those places where we have the greatest needs within our school buildings? So we're doing tons of work to try to dig down into the data, so we're making sure that we're meeting that priority. The third piece here is to strive for what we call asset-based pedagogies that recognize cultural differences. And not as something to be overcome, but really as assets for teaching and for learning. And I think we do very, very well in this respect, but we are really focusing on how we can be even better in that respect. And then along that line, we are aligning our work with the New York State Education Department. And I think Damien shared this document with you several months ago. They have a document where they outline culturally responsive, sustaining education framework. And I think we have a graphic of it next. That really tries to think in a comprehensive way about how we meet the needs of all students. And you can see, you know, the trunk of all of this is our students, and then the branches are the various adult supports that work on behalf of our students. So obviously our teachers and our administrators, our Board of Education, and all those other entities that support the process. Looking at, you know, a welcoming and affirming environment. How do we make sure our students feel safe and welcome and secure here in school? Is our curriculum inclusive on all levels? Are the experiences that they have, are they driven by high expectations for achievement and you know, rigorous instructional approaches? And then around all of this, we absolutely have to continue thinking about our ongoing professional development and our learning and support. And these will be themes that you'll be hearing from us, you know, as we get rolling through the budget and most of the year. So it's a lot of work. It's complex work, but it also is work that drives us to our mission, ultimately, to talk about how we make sure we serve all students well. So with that, what questions do you have? Rebecca.
How is economically disadvantaged student defined?
Free and reduced lunch.
Just free and reduced lunch?
That's the only indicator, yeah.
And children in foster care, is that previous history of foster care or actively in foster care?
I don't know the answer to that, Damien. We have.
My understanding, I don't know if we've ever received an exact definition of what that means, but my understanding is it would be anyone who is in active foster care who resides within our district and attends our schools.
That's a great question. We haven't actually received any like lists of who that may be or anything specific about it. Sean.
The performance levels, the difference between a 1 and a 4, what does that sort of magnitude look like? Is that, you know, is it, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, and that's kind of a complicated question because it's different for each one of those measures, those metrics. So the difference between a 1 and a 4, for example, on chronic absenteeism, you know, that's going to basically be based on ranges of percentages of students who are chronically absent. 1 to 4 on academic achievement, for example, is going to be based on performance indices that are set by the state and how our students achieve based on those performance indices. So each one of those has kind of its own unique set of 1 through 4 metrics. When you look at things like the CCCR, the College Career and Civic Readiness, it's you earn points for students who take advanced placement courses, for example. Students who earn an honors credential or students who are earning a CTE credential, those kinds of things. You get certain amounts of points for each one of those levels that are above and beyond what a typical Regents diploma would earn a student.
So with that, are there certain areas that are the low-hanging fruit to improve upon? Well, I mean, how will we set our priorities in terms of responding to things that are less than a 4?
So that's kind of what we're alluding to here. So the areas that we really need to be honing in on, economically disadvantaged, being culturally responsive, I would say those are kind of the top priorities for us district-wide. There are nuances by school, though. You know, Pine Bush, for example, does not have a high percentage of economically disadvantaged students. Altamont, however, does. They have the highest in our district, which is about 30% of their population right now. So each school has kind of its own unique set of needs. Gilderland Elementary School had several areas that they had to hone in on, so they had to do a needs assessment based on each one of those. So really the idea, again, is for those priorities that are identified within the school to come forward to the district, and the district needs to be responsive to those, both fiscally but as well as in supports and professional development as well.
We should probably mention chronic absenteeism as another area where we're spending a lot of time. It's 18 days. If you think 10% of the school year is 18 days, it's not hard for some students to be absent 18 days and have that designation as being chronically absent. So our eSchool data tool actually helps us find those students quickly by building, by subgroup, so we can think about how do we support those students? What's the reason why they're not getting to school? And one of the things we're discovering is that it's more family-based than it's individual child-based. So that's another area that's important for us to look at.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I'll just share with you an observation related to the chronic absenteeism piece, and I'll focus in on Guilderland Elementary, which has a very high E&L population. They were pretty dinged on chronic absenteeism, largely because certain cultures and communities go back to their native countries for long periods of time. So we've had a number of students, one particular group in the Asian Pacific Islander subgroup, the chronic absenteeism rate, they received a 1 on that. And as we dug into the data and really started to research why they're absent, we found a number of observations that were related to the families going back to their home countries, staying for 2 months at a time, 3 months at a time, which affects our data. So, as we look at that, part of it is not necessarily say student improvement procedures, but it's really outreach with the families and helping them to understand that, when they're absent for 2.5 months, 3 months out of the school year, it's going to have an impact on their academic growth as well. And working with the families to see what we can do to meet their needs, but also to meet the academic needs, because those are also a basis of accountability for us as well. So there are some complexities in this work that, are largely driven by culture, largely driven by family, but it's really imperative for us to know what those things are and how do we appropriately respond to those kinds of observations as we go forward.
Barbara?
Title I schools, I know Altamont's one. What other schools are Title I schools?
Farnsworth and Westmere. Guilderland missed it by, I think, 0.2%.
Tim and then Ben.
I was just curious on that growth score. Is there kind of a pitfall or trap that you could get in a position over a couple years where, I don't know if max out is the right term for that growth score, but you could be doing very well so that there is no room for growth? How does that get factored in?
So we affectionately call that the ceiling effect. So it is an observation that we pay close attention to. It does happen. So the example that I shared with you, we were at level 4 for achievement, but the growth was a 2. So that's one of the questions that we need to look carefully at. Does that observation factor into that idea of a ceiling effect? Is that something that we can even be responsive to, or is it just naturally going to emerge with that level of high academic achievement score? When we bring this up in various settings with the state or with BoCE's data teams, we are assured that that can't happen, but I'll try to be correct here. I don't know if I believe that, to be honest with you, because we observe it fairly regularly. So it is a consideration.
Why don't you stay here? Ben?
Okay.
I know that New York State's plan has a piece about school climate. Is that not true? Bullying surveys and safety in school, and in particular LGBTQ atmosphere.
So
how does that fit into this?
It is not yet an accountability measure. However, I think it will inevitably become one, because that is also a basis in ESSA. One of the accountability measures that is coming upon us now that is brand new is suspension rates, for example. Discipline rates. We now will be held accountable for, exceedingly high suspension rates with particular subgroups of students, those kinds of things. Climate and, really just perceptions, I think, is on the top of our list right now anyway. So I think we're already engaged in some conversation. We've sent out a thought exchange last week. We're talking with some research groups right now about how to really formally engage in the metrics around that. Like, what does that mean? How do we do the statistics around that? How do we make sure? So we're already down that pathway, and I think we'll continue down that pathway. not just because the state might say it's now an accountability measure, but really because when we look at our subgroups and we identify certain subgroups that maybe are not engaged as well as we would like them to be or performing as well as we would like them to be, we want to know from them, what's their experience? What can we do better? Is there something that is affecting your ability to achieve and learn and grow relative to other groups of students? It's work in progress.
Any others? All right, well then, thank you all.
Thank you.
That was classic good news, bad news. The good news is a tremendous amount of data that we'll be able to use at the board level, district level, community level. The bad news is that unlike the unified sports program, you'll never get a pep rally out of all of that information. But you never know.
Never know.
Probably get some faculty meetings out of it. We move on next to the consent agenda for tonight. It consists of the minutes from our October 15th, 2019 meeting, CSE and CPSE recommendations. There's a few personnel action items, and then financial reports for the period ending September 30th, 2019. So can we get a motion to approve? Barb? Second. Judy? Any questions or comments? And all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. And moving on, the next part is information items, and we start off with 3 items regarding curriculum and instruction.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with some good news. I'm pleased to report that the Guilderland High School Chemistry Club recently participated in the National Chemistry Day at the New York State Museum, and this was on Saturday, October 19th. There were 20 club members engaging in activities centered around the theme of marvelous metals. Some were seniors who have participated in this event for the last 3 years, and there were 5 freshmen this year who have not taken chemistry yet. This event has become a tradition, and the club is growing to include students at all grade levels. They have also been asked to work with students in other districts and to participate in events at other organizations, including MySci. There will be more to come from this amazing group of students, but we want to congratulate them for their fine work this year. And from our art department, I'm happy to share that Guilderland High School art teacher Meredith Best has worked in a prestigious regional exhibition at the Hyde Collection. 82 artists were selected from over 1,500 entries. Meredith will be participating in an Artside chat at the museum on November 20th at 10:30 a.m. The Artists of the Mohawk Hudson Region Exhibition, or AMHR, is one of the largest standing juried exhibitions in the country with a history of over 80 years. Artists living and creating within a 100-mile radius of the capital region are invited each year to submit their artwork to the hosting museum. This year, the Hyde Collection will house the exhibition in collaboration with guest juror artist Victoria Palermo. And I did include a photo of Mrs. Best's artwork, and it is entitled Recycled Ridiculousness. There for your viewing pleasure. And lastly, also from the art department, I want to extend congratulations to Shannon Elliott, who is the instructional administrator for art, family and consumer science, business, and CTE, for co-authoring an article published in the November edition of the National Art Education Association's journal called Art Education. The article, entitled How Labels Affect Art Education, conveys an important message regarding the use of language and labels in both policy and practice to groups of teachers. A perception survey was used by Dr. Elliott to identify the impacts of such labels on teachers. Many themes emerged which indicated that misuse of such labels can have adverse effects on our art teachers and our program. Quote, being mislabeled causes art teachers to be perceived as outsiders among our employees and colleagues despite working toward the same goal of providing students with a well-rounded education. So attached for your information is the article in its entirety. It's a good read from Dr. Elliott.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? All right, we'll move on to the next information items, which is the superintendent's report, and also 3 items for tonight.
All right. Just prior to this evening's Board of Education meeting, our school start time task force met via an Uber conference with our consultant from School Bus Consultings. And I will characterize it, we saw a first draft of some potential options for altering our school start times to have a later start for our high school. I'll go on to say that I don't think any of the options are quite ready for prime time. We had a good discussion with the consultant and among ourselves about the various pros and cons of some of the things that he presented, and he needs to do some fine-tuning. The committee still also needs to do some work. The school bus consultant role was to think about what is possible around transportation. It was not his task to figure out the trade-offs on programmatic implications and those kinds of things. So our task force still has quite a bit of work to do. So we're going to follow up with him after tonight, get some revised scenarios or options to look at. We'll bring the committee back together again. We'll have to get a date, and we'll be back again with another update. So the work continues. And I know we had Barbara and Rebecca and Ben, who are on that committee, with us tonight. So here we go. Any questions on that one? All right, hearing none. I'm just getting a meaningful look from Mrs. Frederigo over there. Are we ready for the next? So my next item tonight is a request for a memorial for a kindergarten student of ours who tragically passed away at the end of the school year last year. Beth Beanie, who's our principal at Westmere Elementary, on behalf of her faculty who worked on this, is requesting that a collection of 3 books be placed in the Westmere Elementary School Library as a memorial to this kindergarten student who passed away. We have a new board policy around memorials. It's policy 7510. So we've worked through our process in that policy to bring this to you as an information item tonight. So Business Practices Committee reviewed the application last week, and it's here before you for information and possibly more. Tonight, it's a collection of books that are age appropriate for students to begin to understand death and dying. And Beth reached out to the grandmother of the little girl, who was very appreciative and very moved by this gesture. So, other comments or questions?
I just had a question on the permanency of books. You know, they wear out. Will it be the desire of these people to replace those books as they age out or get raggedy?
It's a very good question. We really hadn't discussed that, and it's not embedded in the policy for certain. But, you know, our librarians are awesome, so I'm sure as they see parts of the collection becoming worn, that we could certainly find a way to replace. Yeah, maintain.
Ben?
I was just going to say that I was present at the Westmere PTA meeting where this idea was first brought forward, and there was a good discussion about what form this memorial might take, and some people followed up with me to get copies of our policy, and I think that this is a very appropriate gift. It's very much what we had in mind when we wrote this policy. You know, instead of planting a tree, how about we add something to the school, you know, for the students. So I think they did a good job here.
I would agree with that, and thought we could take it one step further, and so I would like to make a motion. I thought they did a fantastic job with this, and it's kind of our first crack at this new policy and procedure. And while it's very sad with the circumstances involved, it's something that I think we could take a look at right tonight. So I would go ahead and make a motion to suspend the rules so that we could go ahead and vote on this tonight. So do I have a second? Barb for the second, and Judy. Any discussion? And if not, then we would need a second motion to go ahead and approve the memorial. Sean, second. Judy, or I'm sorry, Gloria. And any discussion or questions or comments? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And so the motion carries 8-0. I think that was very nice. Very good.
My last item tonight is an update. Mrs. Frederigo also inspired this one. Earlier in the summer, she asked for just an update on our participation in our career and technical education program that we participate in through the BoCEs. So I've included in your packet both total numbers of students who participate in career and technical ed programs at BoCEs. We have 61 students this year. And you have the breakdown of the 20 or so different programs that they are enrolled in. I also wanted to point out that several of our students receive integrated high school credit in mathematics, science, and English through their participation in these programs. So they actually get really dual credit for the work that they do. And it's a great way for students to get hands-on learning, but also earn academic credit at the same time. So that's some, I think, telling information. I also wanted to share some data about enrollment with the FOCUS program. Last year, we made some changes to the FOCUS program that are being implemented this year. And at this point, I want to just mention enrollment a bit. Our enrollment is up 31 students from last year, 2018-19, to this year. 12 of those are 9th grade students who are in the program for the very first time. By all accounts, from Amy Hiralchek, who is the administrator who oversees that, but of course Mike has a big role too. The program is going very well. There's a tremendous amount of positive energy among the group, and we're going to do some program evaluation along the year to make sure we're on the right track. But so far, it's been really positive. And I know their service day is coming up, I want to say November 21st. And I know you'll all receive an invitation for a luncheon that they put on at the Guilderland Center Fire Department if you're available in the middle of the day. It's very good food, and the students talk about their experiences doing community service in the morning and talk about the impact of the program in their lives. And it's a wonderful pre-Thanksgiving reminder of what's important in life. So if you're available, it's very much worth your time. Any questions on the career and tech or FOCUS?
Okay, thank you. And I should point out that I did email the superintendent and SEMA during the day about bringing up that memorial for a formal vote, and SEMA said that would be fine to do, so just wanted to include that information. Next up on the agenda, we have 3 parts. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over the board president information. So for that section, there is a list of 10 policy and regulation items for review. And I think this is all a first read for everyone. Any questions or comments about that? It's all pretty straightforward. And then we have some adoption materials later on, so that's coming up. Next up, we have 3 parts of action items. And we start with school business management items in Part 1 and 2 service agreements.
Thank you, Tim. Just one item this evening from me, and that's a resolution to approve service agreements with Crossroads Center for Children and Northern Rivers.
All right, can we get a motion to approve both service agreements? Judy, second. Barb? And any questions, comments, or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. And that's it, right?
Yep.
You're good. Okay, thanks. In Part 2 of the action items, we have the superintendent back with a co-curricular club.
I just have one club this evening. This is a garden club for Guilderland High School, with 3 advisors and a number of youngsters who are interested in engaging more in the garden work that's been established here.
All right. And let's see, we need a motion to approve the garden club request for the high school. Rebecca? Second, Ben. And any questions, comments, or discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries 8-0. And finally, in this section, we have board president action items, and there's 7 school board policy and regulation items. Topics range from sexual harassment, public use of school buildings and grounds, to student health services and student transportation. Can we get a motion to adopt the board policy items? Barb, second. Kelly? And any questions, comments, or discussion on any of the policies or regs? All right then. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. All right. That's the meat and potatoes. Now we go on to the board committee reports. And I'll go ahead with the audit committee if that's okay. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 20th, 8:15 in the morning, and we're at Farnsworth Middle School. That's a change for us. Normally we meet at district office, but we'll be at Farnsworth Middle School. We will be looking at internal and external audit proposals for the school year. And I wanted to thank Ben for acting as kind of a sub at one of our meetings on September 30th, so that was very good of him to be there. And the audit committee is a little bit different from other committees, that we have 2 members of the community on the audit committee, and they are fantastic guys, so I just wanted to give them some public recognition. Jason Mara and John Santaniello, hopefully I got that right, and they've been serving on the committee for many years. They do a great job, a lot of financial background, great questions. They never miss meetings, and so we really appreciate their help on that committee. And I'll just check with Neil if there's anything else. All right. Next up, Business Practices Committee.
Okay, Business Practices had a meeting, I think, on the 22nd of October. And we had community members with us who made a presentation on bringing synthetic turf field to the high school. We are one of 2 schools in the division without turf, and they feel it is not fair to our kids. They showed lots of pictures of dirty uniforms and field conditions that we have to deal with. Based on the climate, let's see, grass fields are generally not ready or usable at the start of the spring athletic season, and turf can be cleaned of snow and immediately available for use. Grass fields are also affected by snow and rain, both spring and fall. And they said optimally the district would install turf on the football and Snyder Field, which is the soccer field. But the priority is the football field. The booster clubs are currently funding practice and game turf at other local schools and colleges, and they said that one of the groups, the mother who spoke said, the booster club pays $11,000 a year, which is just mind-blowing to me. Lacrosse, field hockey, and soccer state sectionals are only played on turf, creating competitive disadvantage for teams that play on grass. They said phys ed classes could benefit from turf because they could have more outdoor activities, and there might be a small dollar benefit coming from outside groups if we had time to rent out the fields, which I wasn't sure we would. The estimated cost to replace the football field is $1.3 million. If the Board of Education were inclined to pursue installation, giving the estimated cost, it would need to be a separate bond proposition. It would be eligible for state aid reimbursement, currently 64.8% of the cost over 15 years borrowing, as long as it is coupled with at least $10,000 approved building renovation. The life expectancy is up to 12 years. Cost to do the Snyder Field would be larger because of necessary drainage accommodations, a larger play surface, and lighting. And at the meeting, what we're bringing forth for this part of it is, does the Board of Education have an interest in asking the district office team to gather more information? So I need to see what people have to say.
Barb?
I definitely have an interest. I mean, it is really hard on our athletes because playing on grass versus playing on turf is a world of difference. And so we're spending all this money sending our kids to Mohanison or University of Albany, to
That's, the
practice.
booster clubs are doing that.
Yes, I
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying, the maintenance of the turf field, long-term is going to be less than what you pay in fertilizer, what you pay in mowing and all those other costs. And I think they said we're only one of 2 suburban council schools that don't have a turf field. And it really impacts our athletes. They can't get on a field sometimes for the whole month. And I think this year, because of all the rain that we had, they never actually played on a grass field and just could practice in the parking lot the entire time. So I definitely, would support it. If we get 60% reimbursement, and if they do some fundraising, either through a legislative grant or whatever, that could, it sounds terrible, $1 million, but 64% reimbursement. And as I said, if we could get some legislative grants from Fahey or Amador, that would reduce the cost even further. And it is so sorely needed, and it's been needed for years, that at some point we have to bite the bullet.
Sean?
I just want to put out, those figures were provided by the community group, and that was not something that the district prepared.
No,
Barbara?
I think, Neil,
The estimate was lower. We have,
Okay.
we consider to be better information, so I included that in the update to make sure we are talking
Okay,
more
so the numbers
realistic
that
numbers.
Judy had were your updated number, is not what we were
Yeah,
provided,
right.
okay.
Correct.
Cliff took exception sort of with their claims of maintenance costs. I think Cliff does a fantastic job with with facilities here, and he had a concern that what they projected in terms of savings was not really the savings. It was not that substantial. I did note that during those discussions, and Regan, there's Regan back there, that we talked, to redo the field at the track would not really solve all the problems, because it would only serve certain sports. It wouldn't be as multi-purpose as it could be as if we had a blank slate to build a new turf on. So there's a lot of things I think that have to go into this, but, and I said at that meeting that, I sort of want to hear from the district team as to where this fits in the priority list, because this is the challenge that we have without a strategic plan to guide us and to feed back into and ask that question, is that, does spending $1 million, $2 million in turf, granted there's a 60% reimbursement, does that align with what our goals and objectives are? And then we just heard about the things that we have to deal with in terms of ESSA. So I just don't, that's the challenge I had at that meeting, and the challenge I'm going to have moving forward, is that where does this all fit in? Because again, given money is not a finite resource, I would totally do this, but I struggle, because we had a hard time with the last capital project on things, renovation of science labs that I've been in. And I think that if you want to talk about preparing students for the future, I would renovate science labs before I'd ever renovate a turf field. And my daughter plays field hockey, so I'm totally putting her at a disadvantage by not advocating for something that I know she would use. But there are other things that we've traded off, and we have got to set those priorities. And tonight we start talking about the budget. I'm gonna, insist that we figure this out, because I need to know where these things fit in.
yeah, well, I think that's what we're looking to say. Would we like and you're saying absolutely, to have the board, or to have the DOT investigate further.
I just want to, when we start making some initial budget asks, I'd like to know where that falls in terms of the DOT's priority.
It would be separate and apart from the operating budget. This would be a separate proposition
a
for
bond
the capital
proposition,
construction project.
But there's other capital needs that this district has too. We have tennis courts that we already have built that we're going to essentially skim coat and Band-Aid because we decided to pull them out of the last capital project. And so we haven't even addressed those things that our team deemed that were essential that we had to pull back because the voters didn't go for it. So I think like throwing something brand new into the mix is just a little confusing to me.
Especially given last year's difficulties with the capital project, to come back out and say, oh, well, there's another capital special vote.
Back to Barb.
If we put it up, if we were to put it up as a bond issue, the people have their say. Either they want it or not. And I don't think it's any reflection on poor planning on us or anything, but, you know, we're here to offer them options. And as I said, once we get some more information as to, you know, what, is the track included in that $1,000,000-something or not?
We would be doing.
High school field.
Well, we're going to be doing work on the track anyway as part of the capital project, so this would be the interior of the track. So we already have money in the capital project to resurface the existing track. We would be working within the interior dimensions of the track. The current football field, the grass football field.
We could do that as a
We would, if we were to go down this road, we would want to try to time them out together, so while we're already working on the track, also install the turf field at the same time. So from a construction point of view, we would want to try to time those out.
The turf there would only be for a football field, as I understood it, was that we prefer a wider soccer pitch, and the football field does not accommodate that. So if we do that, we're investing the money in the football field. And so I have some other issues about, you know, equity to the other sports programs too, about spending this much money on a couple of programs. So.
Okay, so that was,
Colony just put in their track, right? Their combination.
North Colony?
Yes.
they had a huge bond issue because they needed schools and things, and I think that was included, so.
Go ahead.
Another thing I think we need to find out then, is find out what Sean is saying. When you give us the information, give us the total information, the football field as well as Snyder Field. And, you know, what would that take from, rather than just one?
Well, that's kind of, I guess that's kind of the conversation, is what is the direction of the board, if anything.
And I even suggested so let me just confuse you a little bit more about my mindset here and my thought process. Because even at that meeting, I said, well, you probably don't. I don't know if you can sell me on doing one field, two fields. But I said, well, what if we did something even bigger? Because if there is demand for this, we're not gonna recover anything on rental fees by building two fields, because they're going to be used consistently by our own people. But is there a way to build to a point that SED agrees with, but there's going to be some level of excess capacity that makes financial sense to us, that we can actually become let me rephrase this, because into the words that the state likes. We could build a shared service, a shared resource in terms of turf fields. I don't know if that's, in the realm of possibilities, but rather than building one, if we built 5, 6, but again.
If everybody's got them, who's going to be renting them from?
Yeah, that was one of the issues.
And that was the other
two
term
schools,
too.
less than
Right,
somebody else.
right.
Yeah, there are a lot of schools who do have.
They already have them.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in the last budget process, but I feel like before we start with a brand new thing like this, we need to take a look at the stuff that was skimmed out of the last bond vote that were deemed a high priority thing. I mean, can we just put up another a couple $1 million bond vote without looking at the things that we had to cut out of the other bond because that wasn't accepted by the
playgrounds,
right? Things like that. So that would be kind of where I don't mind looking at it and getting the information, but I want to take a look at the things that we had to cut out of the other bond vote first if we're going to go put another bond vote right away. I don't think that's a common practice to do. How often do you do bond votes? Every 5, 6 years.
You have a cycle,
right?
A big one.
So
No, you can do them as often as you like.
I don't know if we can sustain I don't know if
We're
people would go
allowed
for
to
that.
do that.
I think we're pushing it, getting it past the second time, or through the second year, so.
But the question really is, do we want the district office to, the team who would look into it, to look into it further and then give us a presentation or, let us know what they find? I don't know if we have to vote or if we just, what.
How's that petition going that was passed around? I saw it, when I looked at it, it had like 20 names on it or something like that. I'm sure it's grown quite a bit, but is it breaking the?
You can't ignore the public. I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
I think we should at least look at it.
I don't think we have to vote.
Okay.
Well,
Just
if
say-
I think the things that we
291
said, if
signatures.
5 board members are interested in pursuing it, then we
Sounds
get a
like
date.
there's enough interest there to go ahead and pursue
Yep.
more information on the topic, yeah.
And we said that to the group that came and
Yeah.
presented. We said, continue to give us information, continue to reach out and seek grant, things like that, and finding sponsors, try to, get that going, because this is going to take a couple years, if anything, so.
Fit it into the strategic plan at some point. We could revisit that and see.
Luck with that.
Source
Yeah.
of that.
Right then?
Okay, so I think.
No, always, okay. Yeah, so
Oh,
we're
I'm
telling
sorry.
them. Yeah, we have another issue too.
Jump right on to communications. then.
Oh, no.
Sorry. More
Oh, we have
business.
another
Yes,
issue.
another thing that we discussed, we have a veterans exemption that we passed a few years ago. And recently, the school district was approached by 2 area military veterans seeking an increase in the alternative veterans property tax exemption amounts. It was in 2014, the school district granted the property tax exemption to qualifying veterans of World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or the Persian Gulf conflict at the basic maximum exemption amounts of $12,000 for wartime service, $20,000 for combat zone service, and $40,000 for a wartime disability. School districts can pass a resolution to select from either of the lower exemption levels than what we have, or the higher exemption levels also. Adopting a different exemption level will result in a tax shift, which we've discussed with other things, I believe, affecting property owners. If more property is exempted for tax purposes, other taxpayers will pay a higher tax rate per thousand of assessed value to generate the same tax levy amount. I mean, it's just kind of logical. The committee requested that Neil provide an estimate of the potential tax shift based on other exemption levels and survey other districts to find out what they're doing. So that was another thing that we discussed, and so I think Neil is already working on that.
I just have a question for Neil. There are different categories. Are you able to just say increase the amount for the disabled veteran versus does it have to be an increase in all the categories?
It has to be in all 3 categories. That's how the chart is structured. And if you look at the Business Practice Committee meeting minutes, I have included the whole chart. So you have 18 separate exemption levels, but they're tiered all the way across. So those categories. So you have to pick one of the 18 rows, if you will, which set out the separate exemption levels for combat zone and disability as well as service.
That's sad, because if you could pick.
You can't
Someone
cherry
who's
pick off.
limbs and arms and, totally disabled versus someone who just served at a desk job or something during their service, I think is a little bit different, but.
Well,
if you
the
can't, you can't.
chart actually does do that. The question is really, and it distinguishes. So at the basic maximum that we are right now, it's $12,000 for wartime service. If you're in a combat zone, that jumps to $20,000. If you have a disability, it jumps to $40,000. But you still have to choose, of the 18 choices, they're all along the lines of increasing amounts of exemption, starting with combat and then ending with disability. So if you're going to do it, it's going to scale accordingly if you pick a higher level or a lower level.
And we are near the bottom, and there are some that go quite high, and we just have to decide at what level we want to be. Let's see. One more thing that we did was we talked about, we recommended the acceptance of the book collection. We've already taken care of that in honor of Sasha Melville. And our next meeting, I think, is November 26th at 8 a.m., which is Tuesday before Thanksgiving.
I think that's communications, Judy.
Oh, is that communication? Uh-oh. Okay. I'm sorry, that was the date that stuck. Yep. Oh, all we said was that the preferred meeting time is at 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoons.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Communications Committee report.
So, the first thing we discussed at our October 18th meeting was a continuation of discussion that we had last spring regarding potential oversights and flaws in our opt-out policies for students who their parents don't wish them to appear in any school media. There was one instance, for example, of one teacher taking a picture of another teacher's class and posting that picture on Twitter. And of course, as it wasn't her class, that teacher didn't know which students had opted out of having their picture shared. And so we started this discussion last spring, and we mentioned it to the board then. So we continued that discussion, and I think that the conclusion of the committee was that in this day and age, if not the teachers, the kids are all carrying cameras and with direct access to the internet, and they can take a picture and post it in a second, and that we really just can't control that, and we should be honest with people that we can't control that. And so it was suggested that we put on our opt-out forms language to the effect that this applies to district media. So our website, our Facebook page, our Twitter page, press releases that we put out, those we can control, those we can take students' information off of if they so choose, but that we don't make any guarantees about what teachers do on their own websites, what teachers are doing on their own Twitter pages, and especially what other parents and students, PTA members are doing on their social media pages. Still, we encouraged buildings to distribute lists to all teachers of all the students who are opting out, so that something easy like this, where one teacher just didn't know a child in a different class had opted out, we could have less of those slip-ups. Next thing we discussed was community engagement strategies for the budget. I think the committee agreed that what we've been doing works pretty well. We're never going to fill a banquet hall again with people lining up to give us feedback, but we plaster the airwaves, the public library, our signs outside the schools, social media. The only thing that was suggested to be changed was inviting comments and reply tweets right on our social media page, so that if people are there reading it and just are like, well, I'm not coming to that meeting, they could at least click reply and drop us a comment if they so chose. And the last thing that we discussed was a little bit around the role of the Communications Committee. It had been discussed in the Policy Committee, whether it would be worth pursuing clear definitions of all the committees and their particular responsibilities. We didn't really reach any conclusions there. Policy is going to keep discussing it, and so is Communications, and we'll bring ideas forward at that time.
Thank you. And next up is Policy Committee.
We have the results of our work with the prior meeting, and we're meeting next November 15th at 2.
Very good. Thank you. We have public comment number 2. We do have a few night owls who are still hanging in there with us. I say night owl because after 8:30, that's late for me. But nobody signed up, so. You signed up already, so I think we can, it's okay. I'm going to say it's okay.
We don't have too many.
Yeah.
All right, so I know you want to hear from me again.
Sure.
But this is about, you were talking about the memorial request for the kindergarten student, which I had read when I looked at the agenda for tonight. So my friend is here with me. Both her son and my daughter knew the student, and it obviously was, a very, very sad thing that had happened and really deeply affected us. So I'm wondering with the memorial, because we talked about it at the Westmere PTA meeting, I would just really encourage both Dr. Beanie, Westmere Elementary, and even the district to, with this memorial, to publicize that it occurred, to let all the families know, because I think right after that event, I really commend Westmere Elementary, Dr. Beanie and the staff. They did a really good job in, trying to educate us on how they were going to deal with this in the classroom, especially with the age ranges of the kids in the school, but this being a kindergartner student, like everybody just talking about it, the children talking amongst each other, and just really how they were able to kind of quickly find a message and communicate that. But I think what's interesting is at that PTA meeting, it's that after that initially happened, there hadn't been any word about something like a memorial. And then because of the district policy being in place, there's obviously a lot of steps to go through. And so I would just hate for this to kind of be put in the library very quietly and where people don't know that it's there. Because I think that if it's publicized correctly, that it could be a real resource, and it could also, again, bring that opportunity for discussion for families and their children, because obviously at the time, I think we're all reeling from it, but I think these are things that will come up in the future. So I think that I just encourage that the board and Westmere kind of think about ways to make it public.
Great, thank you. I'm about to make a motion that you are at all our public comment. Very good tonight, so thank you very much for your participation and comments. We move on now to board issues, ideas, and sharing. And I'll open it up.
Okay. A few of us probably want to say something.
Okay.
We, three of us attended the NISBA conference in Rochester. Judy and I and Barbara all attended the law conference, which was the first day. There were some interesting strands in there, and we have lots of materials that we brought back. Many of them are electronic, so we can easily send them out. So if there's a topic you hear us mention tonight, just jot us a note, and we'll look through our lists of things. I sent a few out that while I was at the sessions, because I knew like certain people would want to see certain things, but feel free to do that. I particularly was interested in the law conference emphasized some things that I found extremely interesting. One was the communication strategies. I mean, every corporation, everybody is worried that whole bit about how do you communicate well. And they had some interesting, suggestions from the law side of how to make sure that you're doing the best you can regarding communicating. And I'm not going to give you all the details, but the other topic was data privacy. And I know Damien already had mentioned this, so we went, oh, our ears picked right up when we heard that, and that's becoming a very, very big thing legally. The immunization exemption, that changes there this year. They talked about that. And also mental health and substance abuse issues that are coming up, the legal implications of that for schools. We each attended sessions during those 3 days. I attended a few. I found a lot of the ones I attended dealt with issues that were kind of more in the realm of like trauma. I was amazed at some of the strands that were there, but in terms of trauma, how schools deal with kids who have had childhood adverse childhood experiences in that area, and how people are using it. I kept hearing the term coming up, restorative practices, and I know I've heard the term around here too, But I think as board members, we sometimes just hear these terms and we don't know really where it's at. So I was thinking, as I was sitting in these things, I wonder where we're at with that, but I didn't know, so I had nothing to compare it to. So I was thinking to myself, it'd be nice if certain topics that we had a quick graphic that just said, oh, we're trying this, or we've got a seed over here growing. Maybe in one elementary school we're trying this, or in the high school we're doing these, so that we have a better picture of some of these trends that people are looking at. So restorative practices was one. They kept mentioning, in terms of the trauma-informed schools, invest in training. They must have said that a dozen times. It will always pay off. The more training you can give your staff, it'll pay off. And they kept asking the question, are we doing enough? One question they said was, you don't ask what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you. Those are the things that kind of caught my attention. I also attended a session on reducing stereotyping and promoting inclusivity in childhood, which was fascinating to me in terms of when you look at a progression of a child growing from infancy up, when certain things, they become aware of things like color or difference in cultural differences and things like that. And they said something that stuck with me is when we're looking at something, they said, ask the question, who's missing at the table? Which I found very helpful to think about. When you're having a discussion on an issue, ask yourself, who's not here? And that might be the person that you actually need here, or the group that you might need there. They mentioned a movie or a video, or it must be online somewhere, but it's called Being 12. I had never heard of it. It's WNYC had put it out, Being 12, and they mentioned that as a really good resource to look at. And they talked about kids in poverty. I just came in on the part where you got to that, but they were mentioning that as a group being need to look at kids in poverty. I think those were all from the conference. And then maybe you guys, you want to say something?
Well, one of the things I just, a lot of the ones that Gloria is talking about are most of them are different schools will make presentations about things that they've done or things that have worked. But one of the, they also have speakers who are very good, and they had a speaker who was so entertaining and aware. He was Thomas Jefferson's 6th great-grandson, or Thomas Jefferson was his 6th great-grandfather. And he was a great speaker, but as he was talking, he was saying that his family could see, because these were all children, I guess his great was the 7th out of 8 children of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And Sally Hemings, as you probably know, was a black lady, a slave, and they carried on for a long time. But as time has gone on, some people from this union are now presenting as white, and then when people in some places find out who they are, they're angry that they didn't know that this was a black or an had black heritage in them, and were turned off by this, and the different reactions of people to who he was. But he was entertaining. There's always at least one speaker who just captivates. Usually it is the keynote speaker, and that was not the case this year. This was just one of their, but if you can go next year, it'll be in New York, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to learn and to meet with. What I like is just, it's exhilarating. You're meeting other people who have been down many of the roads that we've been down, and talking to people, and just being around education for a couple of days, and it's really an up, and I always enjoy going. So that's what I was saying.
One of the workshops that I found really fascinating was one on homework. And they quoted John Hattie and Alfie Kahn, and the research that they have done, which basically demonstrates to them in their research that it really is sort of a useless exercise. And it was presented by an AP teacher, English teacher at their high school, who hasn't given homework in 10 years. And yet his kids are all successful, you know, in passing the AP exams. And a very dynamic equivalent to Damien, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, that changed the culture starting this year. And they said it doesn't mean no homework, it means meaningful homework. And he gave us an example, you know, have the child go out to the yard and ask questions like, why do the leaves change colors? You know, rather than ditto sheets. They said that the only pushback that they got from their faculty, well, they got some, but the most one was from their math department. And they agreed that, you know, you have to learn your factors. So there are certain things that you have to do, you know, in the way of homework. But other than that, I was fascinated by the fact that the research really was quite demonstrable, that just having kids do hours and hours of homework at their school, the new rule is no homework for weekends, no homework on school vacations. So nothing is due, you know, at the end of a school vacation. And they're very, very happy. And the teachers seem to have, you know, gotten on board. And, you know, as I said, they've made exceptions to a certain number of things. Other workshops very much followed what Gloria was saying on restorative practices. They're basically saying nothing is achieved with a suspension. And other than a school vacation and eating a lot of cookies during the afternoon. Mm-hmm. And the buzzword is this restorative practices. And those schools that have tried it, you know, have been successful. And they mentioned vaping as an example. And I think we got an article at some point a few weeks ago. If kids get suspended for vaping or smoking, what are you achieving? I mean, it's a discipline, but what they're saying is that they need to meet with that child. And again, but in my mind, I'm saying, well, does this mean more guidance counselors, or, you know, how do you have that much one-on-one time? Because obviously, for some of these behaviors, there are, as you put, the ACEs, the, you know, adverse childhood experiences that's prompting this behavior. So until you get to the root of that, you can suspend this kid, you know, from now until forever, and it's not going to change the behavior. And they also, you know, obviously encourage, you know, pointed out when you have your PTA meetings and stuff, who shows up? It's the parents who show up that don't need to show up. And reaching out to parents where these kids are, and they admit it's a very hard, difficult task. But again, the advantages for the student is far better than suspension. You know, so that again, and there were a couple of workshops like that I attended, and sort of with the same theme, that punishment just doesn't work to help that child. So again, you know, maybe we can find out. I know it's hard, but what would it cost to go down this route? You know, that type of thing. I also was the delegate to the meeting, and there were two resolutions that the resolution committee had put out to the people that were defeated. And one was to continue having local districts continue to make determinations as to the substantial equivalency of education delivered in non-public schools. Again, this was a whole unfunded mandate from the state that they're supposed to now go into all the private schools in their district, review their curriculum, see their absentee rate. I mean, it's nuts. And that resolution, I'm surprised, supported that. And it just failed overwhelmingly. I was really surprised that there was very little support for it. And the other one is one that we talked about here, and that was the imposing penalties on parent advocates. And again, the discussion was very much as we had here. Well, what about if the school acts inappropriately? So again, that proposition went down big time. A number of the resolutions that the resolution committee had not supported actually were passed by the body. One dealing with social media, that asking for guidelines on appropriate behaviors, between teachers and staff, just looking for some guidelines from this, but this wasn't a matter of legislation, it was just guidelines as to what's good practice. And not that each district couldn't come up with it on their own, but they're saying, for NISBA, put something together. So, again, a very, very worthwhile conference, and, maybe we can look at homework.
Tim, one more thing. I was hoping that next year we might be able to get Mr. Sanders and Mr. Nooney and maybe Mr. Fry from Linwood to go and talk about what we did with developing the solar field project. We wouldn't necessarily have numbers on how much we've saved, but what we went through and what a difference it will make and the learning situations that are available. I think it would be a really interesting presentation, yeah.
It is going to be in New York, as Judy said, the Hilton, I believe.
It's going to be.
But it's going to be, so you can mark your calendars now, October 29, 30, and 31. You can end that morning, Saturday morning, so you'll be home for Halloween. For trick-or-treating, I know. But, yeah, I mean,
it's
the more
it's
people
so
that,
worthwhile.
yeah, it would be really a great experience for those of you who have never gone. It's worth it.
And you mean go and present at the NISBA
Yeah,
conference?
Those guys, yeah.
Yeah, we get a request.
Yeah, we'll get a
in
request.
January or
Maybe that's
sometime.
something we can
And,
encourage.
Yeah, I already talked to one of them. But I think it would be really interesting.
Yeah.
There'd be a lot of interest from people going too. Not everything is necessarily heavy school things. Some of them are public interest and things you could bring back to your district. So.
Lake Placid is not back in the lineup?
No, which is too bad, because
that was so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, anything else for ideas sharing? Ben?
Just to comment on some of the ideas that were shared, we so rarely talk about pedagogy and curriculum here at this esteemed body. So I just thought I'd make some comments. Restorative justice or restorative practices. I know that we briefly talked about it in the context of our code of conduct at the policy committee last year, but it was such a huge task that we tabled it, and Marie was going to go to administration and talk about it. It's very difficult to do right. Because it's really a mindset change from the current way schools do things, and it requires building a lot of trust with people, and so I would caution imposing a model of restorative justice on our school buildings or district from the top, because it really needs to come from teachers in their classroom and build from there. Marie and then Gloria just said this, mentioned that one way to look at it is a trauma lens, and in response to an email, I said, well, I hope you're including school as a potential source of trauma in that analysis, and what I mean by that is to children, a lot of school is arbitrary. And doesn't make sense, and is really just oppressive. And it's because they're still learning about the world and they're still questioning everything, right? And so they might, you need to be able to defend your rules to them in a way that they understand. So if, say, a school had a no gum chewing policy, kids might question that, and we would explain, well, we don't want you to put your gum under the table or drop it on the floor or what have you. And so the kid might say, well, then why don't you have rules about disposing of gum instead of chewing gum, right? Because that makes a little bit more sense. There's a million rules that make no sense to kids. And so, sometimes the rule breaking is just they don't understand why we have that rule. And so they act out not because they've been traumatized, but because they're in an environment that they don't understand and appreciate. And again, that's where restorative justice comes in, where you can sit down and go, you know what, I think you're right. You know, I think that this rule is misdirected. Homework, I've been saying that for quite a while now. Again, it's one of those huge things where it's so ingrained in all of us that you know, I didn't even bother really pushing it hard. But I don't think there's no utility from homework. But again, as Barbara said, it has to be meaningful, right? A lot of times what I would do with my students, I would ask, do you want this? You know, do you need extra practice? You know, can I give you something? And then deadline-wise, it was, well, do you need a deadline? And a lot of times they said yes. You know, yeah, I need a deadline. Okay, well, let's say 2 weeks. You know, because again, if the kind of work we want to be pushing is not drilling, because machines are going to take care of that, right? Just repetitive tasks, and more about building and coming up with ideas and synthesizing. Well, that takes time, and it kind of naturally happens outside of school anyway, and it becomes more of an organic thing instead of a, here I know we just covered this in class, but here's 40 more of the exact same problem for you to bang out. And that's particularly true in math. I know there's no way to get out of state standards and stuff, but most math you don't need to know. All the math you could ever want, up to and including calculus, you can just type into Google and Google will give you the answer. That's something machines will always be better than all of our students at. And except for pure convenience, there's no reason to know what 72 times 18 is off the top of your head, because all of us will be carrying technology in the future and today. So that's my thing there, is like, sure, do you want to drill the kids to know that 9 times 3 is 27? Okay, if you have to. But again, is it important work? Absolutely not, in my opinion. So, thank you.
Barb.
This reminds me of something that I didn't even know existed. Apparently there's a thing called Google Math, whereby you can type in any problem. They will tell you exactly how to proceed to get the answer, the reasons why you do this, that, or the other thing. I mean, it's just amazing what that little machine can do.
Mm-hmm. I prefer Wolfram Alpha. I'm serious.
You can't take the machines into the tests. So
Right.
sooner or later, you do have to.
Right, our system's not built for reality, so we have to play to the system a little bit, but you know, my point stands.
Great information. Gloria.
I'll just share one other thing. Last evening, Saratoga PTA sponsored an evening presentation, and the guest was Max Schachter, whose son Alex was shot and killed by a gunman at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School on Valentine's Day 2018. Amy Horalchuk was there from the high school, and Seema and I were there. It was a gut-wrenching presentation, I have to tell you. The gentleman has made it, you know, his goal to make sure that this doesn't happen to another kid, but he also knows it's going to happen again. And so his main goal is to change that mindset of people that say it's not going to happen here. And he's basically giving his life to this. He's become a driving force. He was sat on the commission in Florida, which examined what happened, identified how things might have been prevented, and they issued a 400-page report. And in next month, in fact, in November, sometime in November, an online clearinghouse will be available for best practices. It's going to be on a federal level to help schools deal with issues and to find best practices that people are using. They're also rolling out a whole school safety rating system. So they are really making this, and he has really made it his life's work. There's a website called schoolsafety.gov. and safeschools4alex.org, which he kind of heads that. Four big ideas came across to me. Training. I mean, you could say it again and again. Training is the most important thing you can do, so that it's like muscle memory. You know exactly what to do. Everybody needs to know. Networking with law enforcement. And I was feeling pretty good about where we are at, because I know the close relationship we have with our law enforcement here. And the failures that happened there, it was heartbreaking. So networking with law enforcement, establishing effective communication channels, and which I never heard of, called Stop the Bleed. It's called teaching people, everyone, kids, adults, because he kept stressing the point, you can't rely on people coming in to help you. You have got to be ready to help yourself or the people around you if you're in that situation. You can't wait for help to arrive. They're going to be a few minutes, and in that small amount of time, you could lose lives. And at this high school, they didn't get to the third floor for 43 minutes. Kids bled out during that time because they never rushed the building. They never went into the building in time. So he said everyone should be trained in those kind of things. It was a very powerful evening, very emotional. And I know he came today. I believe he met with the leadership team.
He met with the high school leadership team, district office team was there, Nick Angle. I think that was it. Spent about an hour or so.
Yeah, and he is the most open, willing to help in any way and give any information that might have. But this is what he's dedicating his life to in memory of his son.
We will be doing staff complete training with our administrative team later this year, and we can expand it from there.
Yeah, good. And then maybe that website, or it's going to be through Homeland Security. It's going to be attached to this database of best practices, somehow through them, that you can draw on that information too, and the rating system to do a rating.
Just wanted to, I'm sorry.
By training, you mean drilling with the children? That's
Yeah, and you know, he said something that was interesting. He said, don't only drill for one thing, like they talked about, getting out of sight, that whole idea. But things like that went wrong there was, in the place that's out of sight, that's where the teacher's desk was. So the kids couldn't get in that space. Like 2 kids were left out in one classroom. They couldn't fit in that space. They got killed. They hid behind a TV. So all these things, so they said you can't just have one option. I mean, he talked about teaching people options, being ready to move, get out of the building if you have to. So there's a lot more to this than, I'm even able to communicate at all. But he just got me really thinking about the whole question of safety and how important it is. And that whole question of it can happen. It can happen anywhere.
I think the issue too with Stop the Bleed is the nature of the weapon, right?
Yes.
So certain weapons will allow exsanguination, much faster than others.
Well, they hit an artery. Yes. And they had the door, the bathroom doors were locked, so the kids couldn't go in them during the classes. But then the kids couldn't get out of the hall on the second floor to get out of the way. So many things went wrong. And hopefully, I know they've learned a great deal from it, and they're sharing it, and the idea is to get more and more information. And they looked at all other school shootings as well. They were gathering information from all those areas.
Just wanted to thank you, Tim. I wanted to acknowledge Colette Gallagher. She was here this evening with the Unified Sports Programs as one of the coaches. Max, the gentleman that spoke, is her brother-in-law, and Alex was her nephew that was tragically killed. And knowing that Max was going to be in the state and available to speak last night at Saratoga, she asked, I think she whipped that together pretty quickly, and invited the district office leadership team to come to HSLT this morning, at which Matt spoke. So it was nice to meet him and hear the story firsthand.
Anything else? All right, lots to process tonight. That's very good information. So we need a motion to adjourn the public meeting and go into executive session to discuss parameters for negotiations with the district office confidential staff. Barb, and second Sean. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries 8-0. Thank you.
Damien, I don't see.